Welcome back. I think you remember that we ended with Ramses the Great, and in a way we ended on a downer. Ramses was old, crippled, dies at the age of 86. But think of him as a person, all the things we talked about. But the sad news is that after Ramses the Great, it's downhill for Egypt also. Egypt is going to go into a slow decline. It had such power and wealth that it'll take 5 centuries before it really goes down. I mean, think about 5 centuries. Far longer than the United States has been in existence. It's one of the things I always try to teach my students, that how long the Egyptian civilization went on for. 3,000 years of recorded history. Compare that to 200 years of America. We went crazy with our bicentennial. A blink in terms of Egyptian history. Now, let me try to tell you in just a few minutes how it went downhill for 5 centuries. And then I want to get to our subject today, the Nubians. Foreigners who are going to rule Egypt and be great kings. As I say, after Ramses the Great, it went downhill. Why? It's a combination. Partly, the pharaohs weren't as great as Ramses. We don't have any amazing personalities. We don't have any kings who are going to really do great things. They don't last very long. Many of the kings rule for only 3-4 years, perhaps. In the 20th dynasty, we have pharaohs naming themselves Ramses. Ramses the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, up to Ramses the 11th. Ramses the 3rd is pretty good. No relation to Ramses the 2nd, though. It just takes the name. But after him, all of the Ramesside kings are weak. So weak that when we get to Ramses the 11th, there is a revolt. And you know who takes over Egypt? The priests, the high priests. Now, how can the priests take over Egypt? It's partly this triad. Remember we talked about how the military, religion, and the pharaoh all worked together, and if the pharaoh had a good victory, he donated to the temples? Well, this had been going on for centuries and centuries. And by now, the priesthood was wealthier than the pharaoh. So much land had been donated to the temples that they owned tremendous amounts of land and the cattle on it and the produce, and the priests were powerful. So during the reign of Ramses the 11th, a pharaoh who is weak and hanging on, a high priest writes his name in a cartouche and says he is king of Egypt. And the next dynasty will be the priest kings, the 21st dynasty. So we even get priests ruling Egypt. But that's not the end. We still have centuries to go. Egypt will eventually be invaded, right? They will be invaded by Libyans, foreigners, who will rule Egypt for almost 200 years, right? As long as America. They come from the western desert, they settle in Egypt, and eventually they take over. And at the end of the Libyans, there's going to be confusion. It's going to be fractions fighting for control of Egypt. And that's where our Nubian kings come in. Egypt has gone down so much that there are 5 different people claiming to be pharaoh. They're princes, they're petty princes, all battling it out. And then Egypt will be united by the Nubians. Now, who are these Nubians? The relationship of Nubia with Egypt was a love-hate affair for 2,000 years. Nubia geographically is the southern neighbor of Egypt. Egypt's border stops right at Aswan. Now, the reason it stops at Aswan is there are boulders in the Nile, big boulders, which form a cataract, meaning the water rushes over it. Makes navigation almost impossible. If you're going to go south of that cataract, you're going to have to take your boat around it, or you're going to maybe have to navigate it through it with ropes on either side of the Nile, men holding the boat as it goes, just so it doesn't crush against the boulders. When you go further south still, there's another cataract and another and another. There are 5 cataracts in the south. Nubia is on both sides of the Nile by these 5 cataracts. So it's southern border. It's where the modern Sudan is today. It's what we would call the modern Sudan. The Egyptians never called it Nubia, though. Never. That's a modern term, relatively modern term. They had 2 names for Nubia. One I mentioned, biblical land of Cush. So in the Bible, they are called Cush. And usually the Egyptians referred to them as vile Cush. Any foreigner was usually preceded by vile, wretched, right? Stuff like that. It's kind of like what the Greeks did. You know, the Greek word barbarian refers to foreigners. And the Greeks got it because when they heard foreign languages, non-Greek languages, it all sounded like bar, bar, bar. So they called everybody barbarians, people who said bar, bar, bar. So the Egyptians did the same thing. So Cush is vile Cush, wretched Cush. But they also were called Tarseti, the land of the bow. These were people who were skilled bowmen. And the Egyptians, as I say, it's a love-hate affair. The Egyptians even hired Nubians. They hired them as military men. They were a police force called the Magi. They would police Egypt. They were in the military. So they were used and abused. Now, why did they want Nubians? Nubia was the source of gold for Egypt. Egypt didn't have major gold mines, but Nubia did. And this is where you went for gold. The gold coffin of Tutankhamun that I discussed, that was Nubian gold, came from Nubia. All the gold in Egypt, practically, was Nubian gold. So for 2,000 years, you had this relationship between Egypt and Nubia where Egypt controlled the Nubians, kept them under their thumb. But the Nubians kind of adopted some Egyptian habits, customs. They worshipped Egyptian gods. Right? So there was this mixture of, we're going to control you, but you're really a little bit like us. Right? So when Egypt is weak, when it's divided among itself, the Nubians are allowed to grow independent. They're allowed to grow strong. And for the first time, the Nubians form a unit. Up until this time, Nubia was mainly tribes, independent tribes. But now they are going to have a leader who is going to unite them, march them north, and conquer Egypt. His name is P-I-Y-E, Pi. Sometimes he's called Pianchi, sometimes Pianch, same guy. But with his bowmen, he marches north all the way to the delta, in the north, defeats this confederation of petty princes who are trying to fight him, and takes control of Egypt. Now, he does some very, very surprising things on his way north. First, he's got an army with him. He's going to fight. He's coming north, right, going past the cataracts, going past Aswan, and he stops at Thebes. Now remember, Thebes is the religious capital of Egypt. And what does he do? He celebrates a religious festival. The religious festival of Opet, the most traditional sacred festival of the Egyptians, when the three statues of Amun, Mut, and Khans, those are the three main gods of Thebes. Amun, the hidden one, Mut is his wife, and Khans or Khansu is their son. Those statues were taken from the temple at Karnak, brought down to Luxor Temple, just a mile and a half away, and they stay there for a fortnight. There's feasting and everything. And on his way to battle, Pi stops to celebrate the festival. He is religious. He doesn't view himself as a foreigner coming into Egypt. He views himself as somebody who is going to reestablish the great tradition of Egypt. He's not coming to pillage and plunder. He wants to organize Egypt and bring it back to its greatness, right? So Pi stops at Thebes, goes north, defeats these petty princes, and is in control of Egypt. Now, he goes back to Nubia, and he erects a victory stela. Now, you remember a stela is basically the Egyptian bulletin board. When you wanted something announced, you put up a round-top stone, much like a tombstone, and you inscribed on it what you wanted to say. He erects a victory stela in Nubia. And what does he say on it? Well, the first thing he says is, I defeated all these petty princes, and they bowed down in front of me. And it shows these guys bowing down in front of Pai. But I find more interesting and insightful into what Pai was, who he was, what he was like. He was a horse lover. He's an equestrian. And on the stela, on the victory stela, he says that when he got to the north and he saw the stables of the horses, he was really shocked. The horses hadn't been fed. They hadn't been cared for. And that bothered him. And he punished the rulers for that. I mean, he viewed all of Egypt as his. And he said, they're my horses, and you're mistreating the horses, and that's terrible. I'll give you the language. I like to read the language of the actual documents of the Egyptians. You get a feeling for what it's like. This is right off of Pi's victory stela. Now, remember, he refers to himself as His Majesty, meaning me. His Majesty proceeded to the stable of the horses and quarters of the foals. When he saw that they had suffered hunger, he said, I swear, as Re loves me, and as my nostrils are rejuvenated with life, it is more grievous in my heart that my horses have suffered hunger than any evil deed thou hast done. Right? So you took care of the horses and you didn't feed them? That's terrible. So this is his victory stela. He is a man who loves horses and not afraid to say it, and he puts it right in writing. Now, he does certain organizational things. He's a Nubian. He likes to be home in the south. He doesn't really want to live in Egypt, but he wants to rule it. He wants to control it. He does a clever thing. He sends his sister, Amenartis, to Thebes, the religious capital, and gives her a title, the Divine Adoratress of Amun, right? Divine Adoratress of Amun. What that means basically is she is sort of wedded to the god Amun. Okay, that's a religious thing. More important, she's got her finger on the treasury. I remember, the priest had become incredibly powerful. They had the money. So by putting a sister in this religious office at Thebes, he's got a family member controlling the treasury, right? A very smart move. Now, it's typically Nubian, by the way, to put women in positions of power. Nubians respected their women in a great way. So did the Egyptians. We'll talk about that in a minute. But for example, we have a name in English, a woman's name, which comes from the title of the Nubian queens. The Nubian queens were called Kandake, and that's where we get Candace from. Candace comes from that. Nubian queens were powerful, so it's not surprising that he sends a sister to Thebes, right? Egyptian women were also powerful, so I think that's why she was sort of accepted, you know? It fits. Now, he continues to rule from Nubia, doesn't go north. And he does another interesting thing. He takes these petty princes. He doesn't kill them. This guy is an administrator. He's smart. He doesn't kill them. He terrifies them. And then he says, you can stay in office in your different areas, ruling for me. Collect the taxes, send it to me, but you are going to be my vassals. So he keeps people in position. He's not brutal. Right? He does good things. When he dies, he is buried in Nubia at a place called Kuru, and I'll talk about just where it is geographically in a minute. But the important thing is he has a pyramid. He has a pyramid. Now, you'll remember Sneferu's era, the Old Kingdom, right? 2,000 years back is the era of the Great Pyramid building. And there were a few smaller ones in the Middle Kingdom. But the era of pyramid building was over in Egypt. Nobody had built a pyramid in 1,000 years. Pai builds a pyramid. Now, why? The answer is he is archaizing. He is going back in time and reviving the good old days. He wants to be Egyptian in the old tradition, like Sneferu. So he has a pyramid. But the pyramid is different from any other pyramid ever built. The Nubians are going to adopt Egyptian ways. They love to be Egyptian too, but they're going to do it on their own terms and in their own way. When you look at a Nubian pyramid, it is immediately different. First, it's smaller, much smaller, maybe 100 feet high, rather than, say, the Great Pyramid, which was 480 feet high. So it's a quarter the height. And the angle is much more steep. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. The main one is the Nubians don't have the stone that the Egyptians had. The Egyptians had vast quarries of good limestone. The Sudan does not have good quarries. So they had to take what they had and build smaller pyramids. But that's not the only difference. You'll remember from Sneferu, that pyramids were the burial places of the pharaohs, and inside were burial chambers. Nubian pyramids are all solid. They are solid stone. There are no chambers inside them. So why build a pyramid, right? I think it's just the sense that they wanted to be like the good old days of Egypt. Now, where are they buried if they're not buried in the pyramid? This puzzled Egyptologists. They looked for the burials of the Nubian kings, but didn't find them. Finally, George Reisner, an American, who excavated in both Egypt and Nubia, solved it. The Nubian pyramids were basically tombstones. They were markers for a grave, but the kings were actually buried in a tomb maybe 50 yards or 100 yards away, underground, not exactly beneath the pyramid, but fairly close to the pyramid. So these were just tombstones marking a grave, and the Nubians did it their own way. Now, inside their tombs, doing it their own way. They were buried on beds. Egyptians were never buried on beds, but that was a Nubian custom, to be buried on a bed. So the Nubians were buried on a funeral couch. But they had certain Egyptian spins. For example, they are buried with Ushapti statues. Now, Ushapti is an Egyptian word which means answerer. Every Egyptian believed that he would go to the next world, and it would be just a continuation of this world. Now, what would happen if in the next world, which is a continuation of this world, you were called upon to do work? Every Egyptian farmer had to do work on the irrigation ditches, and you might be called to do work. Well, you wanted to make a better life for yourself in the next world. So they came up with this idea of being buried with servant statues. Little statues, some are only 2-3 inches high if you're a poor man. If you're wealthy or if you're a king, could be 12, 13 inches high. But you were buried with 365 of these statues, one for each day of the year to work for you. And the idea was, when your name was called in the next world, when they said, Amenhotep, it's your turn to work, the little statue would, by magic, get up and say, here I am, and it would work for you. Right? The word Ushapti is ancient Egyptian for answerer. It means it will answer for you in the next world. And these Nubians were buried with Ushapti statues. So they're doing it the Egyptian way, but they're on funerary couches. It's really quite interesting. I don't know if you remember this, but in the Walt Disney movie Fantasia, there is a scene that is based on an ancient Egyptian papyrus that talks about Ushapti statues. It's the scene of Mickey Mouse, where he's the sorcerer's apprentice. And do you remember the scene where he trains a broomstick to fetch water for him, and he can't stop it from fetching water, and he gets an axe and he cuts it in half, and now he's got two of these fetching water, and you get the music in the background, da-dum, 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 and they keep bringing you get more and more water, the broomstick keeps dividing, he's cutting them. That is an ancient Egyptian story about somebody who wanted to make an Ushapti statue out of a broomstick, and it just got out of hand. But those are Ushapti statues, the answerers, and the Nubians are going to have them. One thing they have that no Egyptian king ever had. Remember Pai, the horse lover? He is buried with his horses. They were buried standing up, the horses, with the chariot behind them, right, ready for action in the next world. So Pai was going to the next world with his horses. So he unifies Egypt, conquers it, and is succeeded when he dies and is buried next to his pyramid, not in it, right? He is succeeded by another relative, not a son who marries the right woman. That's not a Nubian custom. He is succeeded by his brother. That is the Nubian custom. If you have a brother, he succeeds you as king. So he is succeeded by Shabaka. Shabaka. Notice these aren't Egyptian names. These are foreign names. These are African names. These are Nubian names. Now, Shabaka does something absolutely wonderful. He is a bit of a philosopher. These guys were intellectuals. I mean, think about what they're doing. They're bringing Egypt back to its old standards. They're trying to restore order. They're interested in the old religion. Even in the Bible, the Nubians are called the pious Ethiopian kings. That's how they're referred to in the Bible, the pious Ethiopian kings. These guys are religious. They're thinkers. They're not just plundering and looking for gold. Shabaka carves a stone, a stela, again, this round-top stone, that is absolutely unique. It's in the British Museum today. It looks strange, and I'll tell you something, every single visitor to the British Museum walks by it, doesn't look at it. It looks like nothing. Now it's a square stone. And it has a square hole in the middle of it, right? Square hole in the middle of it. The reason it's lost its shape of that nice tombstone stela shape is that in the 19th century, some farmers found it. And they cut it down to make a grindstone. So it was used as a grindstone for years. And it's terribly worn. But what's important about this stone is that it's the only document we have from Egypt that can be called philosophical. The Egyptians didn't write down philosophy. We're not even sure if they did philosophy. Some people think, no, the Egyptians never were philosophical, just religious. I doubt that. But Shabaka, a Nubian, carves a document that I think is pretty close to philosophy. And it's interesting. It is sometimes called the philosophy of a Memphite priest. It's partly theological. And what Shabaka says is, I found a document and I made it anew, meaning he copied it. It was damaged. And he is restoring Egypt's heritage. And this document tells about the creation of the world. And what's remarkable about it is it is very, very close to the Bible. It's way before the Bible, but it's a creation version that is very close to the Bible. What it says is that the god Ptah, who is the god of Memphis, the northern capital of Egypt, right? Ptah is a creator god. And the document says that Ptah creates the world. And how does he do it? He thinks it, he says it on his tongue, and it becomes real. It's almost, in the beginning was the word. He says it on his tongue, and it becomes real. It's a fabulous document, and everybody walks by it because they just don't know what it is, but I think it's important. Now, Shabaka, when he dies, is also buried near Pai, next to a pyramid, in a pyramid field. Also different. The Nubians do things really differently. They put their pyramids right next to each other. You can actually touch two Nubian pyramids at the same time. You can stand between them, stretch your arms out, and you can touch two pyramids. They like to be, it was like a family. They wanted to be together. They're all together. And the women had pyramids just about the same size as the men, right? Also a difference, right? He's buried the same place as Pai. It's a place called Kuru, which is right next to Gebel Barkal. Gebel Barkal. Now, the name Gebel Barkal is important. Gebel means mountain. Barkal in Arabic means pure. It's the pure mountain. This was a sacred place. And I think it was sacred partly because of the topography, the way the mountain looked. If you look at Gebel Barkal, the pure mountain, now that's Arabic. In ancient Egyptian, it was called Juwab, the pure mountain. Same thing. Same thing. The mountain is kind of like a high plateau. Don't think of it as a pointy thing, like mountain climbers are always climbing. It's more like a devil's tower type thing. But on one side of it is an outcropping of rock that looks very much like a cobra rearing up, and it has the white crown on its head. And I think that may be the reason they selected this as the holy mountain, the pure mountain. And a couple of years ago, a friend of mine, Tim Kendall, who excavates at Gebel Barkal, decided to get a close look at this cobra. Nobody had looked at it closely in 2,000 years. And he learned mountain climbing skills just to do this. And he climbs up to the back of this cobra thing, hanging down on ropes, and he could see there had been a plaque there, a metal plaque. He could still see the metal nails. And it was an inscription by the Nubian kings. They had taken this and maybe even sculpted the cobra a little more to make it look more like a cobra. But Gebel Barkal is a very, very special place. And that's where a lot of the Nubian kings chose to be buried. Now, the Nubians are only going to last for 5 pharaohs, right? I call them the fabulous 5. They are great, and they do great things. But the one who starts to have a little trouble is the next one, a nephew of Shabaka, Shabitku. Now, he does the same thing. He sends a daughter. She has a wonderful name, Shepenwepet. Shepenwepet. sends her to become the divine adoratress of Amun. Same idea. He's trying to control Egypt from the south, but he's got a problem. A new player on the field. The Assyrians are becoming powerful, and they are about to invade Egypt, right? He's got a problem. But he doesn't deal with it. He doesn't have to. His successor has to deal with it, and this is his brother, Taharka, one of the greatest of the Nubians. Taharka is, I think, a great builder. We don't have his buildings left. Unfortunately, they've been taken down. But you can see one remnant of Taharka. I think if it were still standing, it would be one of the great wonders of the ancient world. Go to Karnak Temple. As soon as you enter the main precinct, there is only one pillar standing left of Taharka. He had a whole hall of these pillars. But it is huge and impressive. It's all that's left of Taharka, but it shows he built at Karnak, and he built impressively. Now, he battles the Assyrians. He goes north. He battles them in Judea before they can enter Egypt. The idea is get them off of Egyptian territory, battle them, right? And he's going to have the Judeans to fight with him. So he'll have allies, and he goes all the way north to Judea, modern Israel. And we have two accounts of this battle. We have two accounts. One from Herodotus, our Greek tourist who went to Egypt and wrote down things. Now, Herodotus says that at night, just before the battle, mice, field mice, ate the bowstrings of the Assyrians. And when they got up, it was a disaster. They couldn't fight, and the Egyptians routed them. So Herodotus' account says, yep, Taharka wins. There's a biblical account also. And the Bible has the same ending, at least, that they agree, Taharka wins. But the Bible says, the angel of the Lord slew many Assyrians. So there's no doubt about it. Taharka defeats the Assyrians in Judea. Now, he's going to have other problems with the Assyrians. They're going to regroup, and in a battle at Memphis, the Assyrians will defeat Taharka. The Nubians are defeated at Memphis in about year 19 of Taharka's rule, and he has to flee Thebes. Taharka goes south. Now, the unfortunate story is that the Assyrians are going to be too much for the Nubians. Too much. We are going to get another Nubian ruling, Tanawatami, Taharka's cousin. It's going to lose, and the Assyrians are going to take over. It is a bold venture on the part of the Nubians. They are brave, they are thoughtful, they are pious, they are trying to restore Egypt to its greatness, and for a brief period, they succeeded. But in the end, the Assyrians were too much. Now, I'd like to say one thing about the Nubians that's often raised, and it's raised within the question of Afrocentrism. Afrocentrism is the belief that much of Western culture comes from Africa. Much of Western culture comes from Africa. I think to some extent it is true that we owe a greater debt to Africa than many people acknowledge. It is often said that philosophy begins in Greece, Western civilization all starts in Greece. That's what all the classicists said. But if you read what the ancient Greeks said, the ancient Greeks loved to trace their heritage to Egypt. The ancient Greeks all said, we learned how to build in stone from the Egyptians. They often say, we learned about the gods from the Egyptians. So there is this tradition, and I think much of what we have comes out of Egypt. Now, mixed in with this question of Afrocentrism, how much do we get from Egypt? We get lots from Egypt, for sure. Is the question of, were the Egyptians black? And often I will get kids in my class, black kids, who will have a T-shirt on that says, Cleopatra was black, right? Cleopatra wasn't black. She was Greek, she was white, she was not black. And I think it's okay to have black pride is what the kids want. But my feeling is what I always tell these kids. If you want black pride, look at the Nubians. These guys come out of the Sudan. They were almost certainly black. They were the black kings of Egypt. And they marched north and tried to do a noble thing. Something unique in the history of Egypt. Foreigners trying to restore Egypt to its greatness. And that was the Nubian kings. Thank you.